Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump now says he will substantially raise tariffs on India over the country's purchase of oil from Russia. A filibuster is underway at the National Assembly for the second day, as the opposition People Power Party seeks to delay the ruling Democratic Party's move to pass a series of contentious reform bills. South Korea started to remove loudspeakers that blared anti-North Korea broadcasts along its border, seeking to ease tensions. But the North has yet to respond to the move. U.S. President Donald Trump has said he will raise tariffs on goods from India over its Russian oil purchases, accusing the country of funding the Ukraine war. But India called the claim unreasonable. Our Park Jun-an has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced plans to substantially raise tariffs on India beyond the original 25% rate set for August 7th, citing India's purchase and resale of Russian oil. In a Truth Social post, Trump criticized India for profiting from buying Russian energy while ignoring the Ukrainians killed in the war with Russia. In response to Trump's post, India called the claim unreasonable and unjustifiable, noting that the U.S. and European Union are also buying energy from Russia, and said it will take all necessary measures to safeguard its national interests and economic security. India has been Russia's biggest customer for Russian crude since 2023 and imported 50% more than China did last year. South Africa is also trying to close a deal with the U.S., with the country facing a 30% tariff. President Cyril Ramaphosa said Monday that South Africa is committed to a principled approach, and the country will continue to use all available diplomatic channels to negotiate a mutually beneficial trade deal with the United States. He also emphasized protecting jobs and industries that are vulnerable to tariffs. Brazil, accounting for 39% of total U.S. coffee imports, is navigating its 50% tariff by exploring alternative markets. China has opened its doors to Brazilian coffee and sesame, a move seen as a strategic counter to U.S. pressure. Brazil is also considering filing a complaint to the World Trade Organization over the U.S. tariffs. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
On the local front, tensions are running high at the National Assembly, where rival parties have entered a second day of legislative standoff after the opposition launched a filibuster on Monday to block a series of reform bills. But with the 24-hour limit on the filibuster approaching, the ruling Democratic Party is expected to begin voting on the first of those bills this afternoon. Our Moon-il has the details.
A filibuster is underway at South Korea's National Assembly as the opposition People Power Party attempts to stall the ruling Democratic Party's legislative push to pass a series of contentious reform bills. The plenary session on Monday brought a set of media reform bills that amend laws governing the country's public broadcasters to the table. This immediately prompted a filibuster from the PPP. The bill is the first of 5 high-profile bills that the PPP has vowed to launch a filibuster against, and marks the first time in a year that the legislature has entered a formal filibuster standoff. Under parliamentary rules, each filibuster can run for up to 24 hours, meaning that only one bill is likely to be voted on before the July extraordinary session closes on Tuesday, despite the fact that the DP-led ruling coalition bloc holds the 180-seat supermajority required to unilaterally end a filibuster. Since the filibuster began shortly after 4 p.m. yesterday, the Democratic Party-led bloc is expected to move to end the debate and call a vote at the same time this afternoon, once the required 24-hour period has passed. The DP's legislative package also includes amendments to the Commercial Act, as well as the so-called Yellow Envelope Bill, which seeks to limit the ability of employers to claim damages against striking union members. The ruling party has branded the bill as essential for restoring fairness in labor relations and promoting industrial peace.
By adjusting the balance in labor management relations, this will be the first step toward enabling dialogue at sites where subcontractors couldn't even speak to their main contractors, paving the way for voluntary horizontal cooperation.
The PPP, however, is framing the bill as a major threat to the business environment.
The yellow envelope bill could encourage unlimited illegal strikes and has high potential to devastate industrial sites.
Before the filibuster began, lawmakers passed a set of non-contentious bills, including revisions to the Grain Management Act, which had been vetoed under the previous administration. Other bills included extending the central government's support for free high school education, redefining AI-based digital textbooks as educational material, and formalizing state support for local gift certificate programs. Any bills not voted on during the current extraordinary session will carry over into the August session, with the plenary session likely to be scheduled towards the end of the month. Moon Tae-ryun, Arirang News.
Loudspeakers installed along the border for propaganda broadcasts against North Korea will be taken down within the next few days. The South Korean government decided to do so as part of efforts to alleviate tensions between the two Koreas. Our Kim Bo-kyung has this report.
South Korea's military decided to remove loudspeakers on Monday that were used for anti-Pyongyang broadcasts. The move comes amid the Lee Jae-myung administration's attempts to ease tensions on the Korean peninsula.
Our military has begun dismantling the loudspeakers directed toward North Korea, starting today. This is a practical measure aimed at easing tensions between the two Koreas, carried out within a scope that does not affect our military readiness.
Removing the loudspeakers comes less than 2 months after President Lee ordered the suspension of broadcasts in early June, an action also followed by North Korea afterwards. Around 20 fixed loudspeakers will be removed within 2 to 3 days, as mobile loudspeakers had already been taken away when the broadcasts were suspended. North Korea still has its loudspeakers in position, though they are not being used. Despite Seoul's proactive measure, one expert says Pyongyang is not going to consider that this is a major step towards opening up dialogue, as it is just a follow-up measure of physically getting rid of loudspeakers after the government promised to suspend broadcasts. However, he did say this was going to help the two Koreas build a bit more trust.
It's hard to say that this directly addresses the fundamental issues that North Korea is demanding. However, by taking actions as the South Korean government had stated, it could help build a bit more trust from Pyongyang toward Seoul.
Pyongyang is known to be demanding the end to ROK-US joint military exercises. However, this is unlikely to happen as the upcoming Ulchi Freedom Shield is expected to go ahead as originally planned as of Monday, according to the Defense Ministry. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
So as we just heard, South Korea has begun dismantling loudspeakers along the border with the North as part of its latest efforts to reduce tensions. For more on this, we're joined by Brian Meyers, Professor of International Studies at Dongsa University. Professor Meyers, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So South Korea has begun removing these loudspeakers along the border. What does this signal about the Lee administration's North Korean policy, and how effective might this be in easing inter-Korean tensions?
Well, it's not really a big gesture because it's so easy to put loudspeakers back up again. I think turning them off was what mattered. And even that wasn't such a big deal when you remember that almost exactly 10 years ago, President Park Geun-hye turned off the loudspeakers only 2 weeks after the North Korean landmine incident at the DMZ. Of course, President Lee has already helped to reduce tensions, I think, by getting the North Koreans to turn their broadcasts off. And let's not underestimate the importance of that. I mean, it's dangerous when two armies are on edge all the time because noise is keeping them awake at night and nobody can think straight. But removing the loudspeakers is not going to reap any further big benefits in inter-Korean relations, I think.
I see. And the Korean government is also considering postponing parts of its annual joint military exercise with the United States. But North Korea continues to say the trainings are military provocations. Do you think that this kind of gesture from South Korea could possibly produce meaningful results?
I'm skeptical there. You know, exercises were canceled and downsized so often during the Moon years that the Kim regime is just not very impressed by that sort of thing anymore. He's probably thinking, hey, I have a much more formidable nuclear arsenal now. I'm closer to Russia now. I'm in a much stronger negotiating position than I used to be. So if you guys want to get my attention, you're going to have to move well beyond the sort of things that Moon Jae-in was offering us, 7 years ago?
Right, you just talked about nuclear arsenal. Last week, Kim Yo-jong, the influential sister of the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, said Pyongyang has no interest in talking to South Korea, and she said the new government is no different from the previous Yoon administration. What might be the North's intention behind this message?
Well, I'm not sure she's wrong. You know, as we saw in the trade talks a few days ago, South Korea is not willing to really push back against Donald Trump. So naturally, Pyongyang is going to infer that if President Lee will not risk angering America over trade issues, he's certainly not going to play a bold middle power type leader role in inter-Korean issues either. He's not going to be in the driver's seat. To revive that old metaphor. But I think part of Kim Yo-jong's intention may also have been to encourage the South Koreans to prove that she's wrong. I think she's implicitly saying, if President Lee wants to persuade us that he's very different from his predecessor, he's just going to have to prove it.
And what Kim Yo-jong also said is the personal relationship between her brother and Donald Trump isn't bad, but said Washington must recognize the regime's status as a nuclear state for further talks. How likely do you think Pyongyang will engage in dialogue with Washington under these conditions?
I think it's very unlikely, but more because of Donald Trump than because of Kim Jong-un. You know, until a few months ago, Donald Trump seemed very eager to end the Ukraine war, which would have opened the way for talks with Kim. But now he's turning into a typical kind of hawkish neocon president, much to the disappointment of the MAGA movement, which elected him. So how can Donald Trump now recognize North Korea's nuclear power status? How can he start from that point in negotiations, even while Kim Jong-un is helping Putin to fight Ukraine? And how can Trump, who's turning out to be the most pro-Israel president ever, reward a country that has been supplying Israel's arch enemies with weapons? How can he bomb Iran for maybe trying to make one nuclear bomb and then turn around and reward North Korea for having made 50 of them? I think that's the bigger problem here than how North Korea feels.
I see a lot of things to consider there. We'll have to see how that goes. All right, Professor Meyers, thank you so much for your insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
South Korea's consumer prices in July saw an increase in the 2% range for the second month straight. Data from Statistics Korea on Tuesday showed that the country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, rose 2.1% in July year-on-year. This is mainly led by higher costs of processed food products and fisheries products. Inflation had remained above the Bank of Korea's 2% target for 4 consecutive months through April, subsequently seeing a dip in May before edging up again in June. South Korea's foreign reserves increased for the second straight month in July, backed by higher investment returns and the issuance of foreign exchange stabilization bonds. According to the Bank of Korea on Tuesday, the reserves stood at $411.33 billion as of the end of July, up $1.13 billion from the previous month. A BOK official explained that despite the strong dollar weighing on the value of non-dollar assets, the foreign reserves rose thanks to new issuance of foreign currency exchange stabilization bonds and improved investment returns. Foreign securities, including U.S. Treasuries, made up the bulk of the reserves at $365.1 billion, or 88.8% of the total. Palestinian militant group Hamas is demanding at least 250 humanitarian aid trucks per day into Gaza as a precondition for returning to negotiations with Israel. However, Israeli Prime Minister says he will convene his security cabinet this week to discuss how to instruct the military to proceed in the enclave to meet all of its war goals. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Palestinian militant group Hamas is open to restarting peace talks with Israel. However, the precondition to returning to negotiations is the entry of at least 250 humanitarian aid trucks per day into the Gaza Strip. According to Al Jazeera, Gaza officials report that over 22,000 aid trucks are currently waiting outside the enclave, while an average of just 84 trucks have been allowed in daily since Israel eased restrictions on July 27th. Humanitarian organizations have warned that at least 600 trucks per day are required to meet basic needs. Gaza's health ministry said Monday that 6 more people, including a child, had died from starvation in the previous 24 hours, bringing the total number of starvation-related deaths since the start of the conflict to 181, including 94 children. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday that he would convene his security cabinet this week in order to discuss how his military will proceed in Gaza and meet all his war goals.
We must continue to stand together and fight together to achieve all our war objectives: the defeat of the enemy, the release of our hostages, and the assurance that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel. Later this week, I will convene the cabinet to instruct the IDF on how to achieve these 3 objectives, all of them without exception.
Meanwhile, according to a report by Axios on Monday, more than a dozen House Democrats have signed a letter calling on the Trump administration to formally recognize a Palestinian state. The latest push signals a renewed effort among some U.S. lawmakers to support Palestinian statehood, with at least one Democrat planning to introduce a pro-statehood resolution in Congress. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now let's take a look at some stories from around the world with our Ji. Good morning, Ji.
Good morning, Eun-ji.
So, Ji, let's begin with the Netherlands saying it will contribute to the purchase of U.S. military equipment for Ukraine. Fill us in on this.
Right. The Dutch defense minister announced a significant military aid package for Ukraine consisting of U.S.-made weapon systems. Minister Ruben Brekelmans made the announcement on Monday via social media, saying Ukraine needs more air defense and ammunition now. Valued at approximately $579 million, the package will include parts and missiles for the Patriot air defense system and comes in response to an increase in Russian air attacks and requests from Kyiv to strengthen Ukraine's air defense capabilities. Brekelmans emphasized that the new package will help Ukraine defend itself and protect the rest of Europe against Russian aggression. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed the decision, saying that Ukraine and Europe would receive greater protection from Russian terror. Poland announced that checks at Poland's borders with Germany and Lithuania will be extended to block irregular migration and close transit routes from Russia and Belarus. Polish Interior Minister Marcin Kierwiński said Sunday that the regulation to prolong controls had been formally submitted to the European Commission, as required under EU rules. The checks, initially introduced on July 7th and originally due to expire on August 5th, will now remain in force until October 4th. Kierwiński explained that the strengthened barriers on Poland's eastern frontier with Belarus and Russia have largely blocked migrant paths, shifting the flow toward Lithuania and Latvia. The expanded checks aim to intercept cross-border transit before migrants reach the German border. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk framed the extension as a defensive response to Germany's tightening of asylum admissions. In the United States, around 3,200 workers from Boeing's defense unit went on strike for the first time in nearly 3 decades on Monday after rejecting a contract offer from the company. Members of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers District 837 walked off the job across Boeing facilities in St. Louis and St. Charles, Missouri, and Mascoutah, Illinois, staging their first strike since 1996. They rejected Boeing's contract offer, which included a 20% general wage increase, a $5,000 ratification bonus, additional vacation, and sick leave. The workers cited unresolved issues with overtime eligibility and scheduling provisions. Dame Stella Remington, the UK's first publicly named Director General of MI5 and the first known female leader of any national intelligence agency, died on Sunday, aged 90. She joined MI5 in 1969 and worked her way up to become Director General in 1992. Paying tribute, the current MI5 Director General said her leadership ushered in a new era of openness and transparency about the work MI5 does. After retiring, Remington was made a Dame Commander of the Order of the Bath in 1996 and went on to write best-selling spy novels featuring fictional MI5 and CIA agents.
As the rain clouds pass, heat wave alerts have once again covered most of the country. Heat wave warnings have been issued for northern Gyeonggi-do, Jeollanam-do, and Gyeongsang-do provinces. Meanwhile, from this morning through tonight, we can expect passing showers in inland Gangwon-do and parts of southern provinces with 5 to 40 millimeters in the forecast, along with thunderstorms. And this afternoon, Seoul, Daejeon, Gwangju will be getting up to 33 degrees. Daegu, Gyeongju both topping out at 35 degrees Celsius. Sunny morning skies will turn cloudy as the day goes on in most parts. Then nationwide rain is in the forecast tomorrow. The central region in particular is forecast to receive a significant amount of rain, possibly up to 120 millimeters for some. This rain will bring brief relief from the heat. Meanwhile, more rain is in the forecast for Jeju and southern regions this weekend.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.